James, the son of Zebedee, understood the world through wind, water, and the physical weight of a net full of fish. Before he was an apostle, he was a laborer on the Sea of Galilee. When Jesus called him, the Gospel of Mark records that James left the boat and his father immediately. He walked away from his community standing to follow a man whose authority could not be measured by any ordinary standard. This choice placed James within the movement's core leadership. Alongside Peter and his brother John, James formed an inner circle invited to witness moments the others were not. He stood on the mountain during the Transfiguration, entered the house where a child was raised from the dead, and knelt in Gethsemane during the final hours before the arrest. By the time of the resurrection, James was a central figure in the early church. He had witnessed the healing, the glory, and the agony firsthand, making his sudden removal a significant blow to the movement's structure. In the decades following the resurrection, James became the first apostle to die for the name of Jesus Christ. Yet, while the book of Acts devotes chapters to missionary journeys and legal defenses, this specific execution is treated with startling brevity. The entire account lasts exactly 2 verses. It records that King Herod laid violent hands on the church and killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. This compression is an intentional signal. The text moves quickly past the act of violence to focus on the political forces pressing against the followers of the risen Christ. The 2-verse assassination reveals a city on the edge of a localized explosion. To understand why James had to die, we have to look at the fragile alliance that held Jerusalem together by force. First-century Jerusalem operated under a tense system of strategic accommodation. Rome provided military oversight and tax collection, while the high priesthood and the Sanhedrin managed daily Jewish life. Stability was the only currency that mattered. The early church disrupted this balance. By proclaiming a man executed by Rome as the risen Messiah and Lord of all creation, they were making a claim that every political party in the city recognized as a threat to the status quo. Arrests and floggings had failed to stop the movement's momentum. The community grew from 3,000 people at Pentecost to over 5,000 men shortly after. The religious leadership viewed this growth as a destabilizing force they could no longer contain through legal warnings. Herod Agrippa, the grandson of Herod the Great, stepped into this vacuum. Through political maneuvering and imperial favor, he had consolidated control over a territory nearly as large as his grandfather's. He was a king who stayed in power by carefully reading the mood of the people he governed. Herod saw that executing James pleased the religious establishment. He used his executive authority to provide a swift political solution that the Sanhedrin could not accomplish on its own, trading an apostle's life for political stability. Herod selected James because of his visibility. As a member of the inner circle and a frequent presence in the temple courts, James was a high-profile target whose death would communicate that the old order had a protector willing to act. Years earlier, James and John had approached Jesus with a request for positions of honor, asking to sit at his right and left hand. At the time, they were thinking in terms of proximity to earthly power and royal status. Jesus responded by asking if they could drink the cup he was about to drink. James insisted he could. Jesus affirmed that he would indeed drink from it, a prophecy of the suffering required by his commitment. Herod's order for death by the sword fulfilled that prophecy. The fisherman from Galilee was the first of the 12 to drink the cup to its end. James never received the earthly throne he once sought. Instead, Herod's political calculation ensured that James would be the first to follow the path of his teacher all the way to the end. Herod's strategy failed to achieve long-term containment. Following the death of James, Herod moved against Peter, but the arrest ended in a public embarrassment when Peter escaped from a cell guarded by 16 soldiers. Herod's own death followed shortly after. The historian Josephus records that after a public appearance in Caesarea, Herod suffered an agonizing collapse and died after 5 days of illness. The movement did not scatter after the execution. Instead, the church continued to increase and spread. Paul and Barnabas completed their missions, and the proclamation of the resurrection moved beyond the borders of Jerusalem. The use of force proved to be a temporary measure against a message that had already accepted the cost of death. In Greek, the word for witness is martys, the root of the English word martyr. For James, His death completed the witness he began on the shores of Galilee. It was the final testimony of his life. The 2 verses in Acts are brief because the violence of a king is a minor detail compared to the endurance of the message James carried. The narrative focuses on the survival of the community rather than the mechanics of the execution. James went first, setting the tone for the apostles who followed. He demonstrated the call to follow Jesus was a call to a complete witness. While the empires of Herod and Rome eventually became ruins, the word James died for continued to spread to the ends of the earth.